Goedenavond, or as we say in Switzerland, Guten Morgen miteinander. So I'm really excited to be here with you today, and you know, I'm a big fan of animations, and last year I talked about animation and how to take advantage of meaningful animation in user interface design. And within that last year, animation really took off. In fact, I think you're not considered cool anymore if you don't use animation. So this whole trend also kind of made me take a step back and think about the more holistic picture of design again. So let me just figure out how that... hopefully that works. So today I want to talk about choice and design and how choice can impact the way we use and think about products. So you know, every morning I face a really difficult decision. Okay, so the laser works, but so okay. That's user experience. All right. So every morning I have a really tough decision to make. Should I stay in bed a little longer, or should I get up and brew myself a nice cappuccino? And that's a really hard decision for 7 a.m. in the morning with tons of other decisions lined up throughout my day, decisions that are potentially more important. And so in short, I struggle a lot with making decisions, but that's probably also why this topic is so fascinating to me. Because good design is about making decisions, and the moment we stop making decisions is the moment users start to suffer. I mean, look at this. There are people in this world who use these kinds of interfaces every day, people with feelings and family. It's excruciating. So we don't want that. In fact, the last thing we want as designers is to put things in this world that frustrate people. So I think Dan Saffer said it best when he said, "Not choosing or letting the user decide is an abdication of the designer's responsibility." So making decisions is a central part of our job, but in reality, we can't make every decision on behalf of our users. Sometimes we need to give them options. And I think that brings up an interesting question. How can we make users decide better? And how do our designs affect people's decision-making? So I became aware of this whole topic when I was in New York, actually one of my favorite coffee places in New York, and as I was paying tips. And in New York, most coffee shops use Square as their payment experience. And the first time I saw it, I was blown away by its elegance and ease of use. Swipe your card, choose a tip, done. I never felt happier spending probably too much money on coffee. Now, compare this to the payment experience we have in Switzerland. So it looks like a Game Boy from the 90s, like, hoo, 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 hoo. But trust me, it's not as much fun. In fact, this thing is really frustrating. So let's see why. Let's imagine you want to tip $1. So what you have to do is you have to enter 1, 0, 0, and confirm after entering your PIN. So, and when I asked the waiter, like when I accidentally once tipped only 1 cent instead of a full dollar, and that was I felt really bad about it, because no service can possibly be so bad that you would only tip 1 cent, right? That's just ridiculous. So I was about to apologize to the waiter, and he said, don't worry, it's all good and stuff, happens all the time. And that's when I realized it's game over, because hardworking people get robbed of their tips because of a shitty designed interface. So Square used a different approach. They combined psychology and design to change user behavior. So let's look at their tipping screen. So there are a few things going on here. First, everybody hates thinking. So the free suggested tips on top come just in handily, because that saves you from mental calculation. And those buttons on top also changes your mode of thinking. Instead of thinking whether you should tip, you think about the right amount that you should tip. So you're going to tip pretty much for sure. And then, second, the number of primary options is set to 3. So we know from psychology that we're all susceptible to the Goldilocks effect. No matter how decisive you are in life, you will always feel attracted to go for the medium choices in life. So whereas 15% seems too low, 25 seems like way too much, so 20 is probably going to be okay. And then, and perhaps most importantly, the custom tip. Now, this design punishes people who choose a custom tip. It's really painful. I actually tried it in a coffee shop, and I was like typing manually my tip because I wanted to check out the experience, not because I was greedy, of course. But then you could see how people suddenly start to observe you. You feel judged, your heart starts pounding, and that's when you realize you're never going for that option again. So what's the result? The coffee tastes the same, but tips went up by 200%. So I don't know about you, but that's a huge increase in tips, and you don't have to change your attitude towards work. You can still be a medium barista, but you get 200% more tips. That's pretty cool. So how is that possible? Well, more friction, less tips. The old experience is painful and introduced a lot of friction to the process. In fact, its friction makes our mind focus on the fact, on the act of paying money. The new experience, on the other hand, is so smooth and so frictionless that you're barely noticing that you're tipping in the first place. I find this fascinating because the way we ask questions changes the answers we get. So I'd like to cover 5 areas here today where design meets choice. Namely, we're going to talk about the number of options, placebo choices. Then we're going to go on and talk about the importance of moments, the importance of sequence, and finally, the power of default behaviors. So let's start with a more personal observation of mine, the power of options. So what is the right amount of options? Is there even such a thing as the right amount of option? Well, one thing is for sure, we live in an age where we're overwhelmed with choices. The endless possibilities of modern life have left many of us feel completely paralyzed and overwhelmed. Take going to a restaurant for an example. Going to a restaurant is both pleasure and pain at the same time, because you know, if you go for the beef teriyaki, you know that you can't get the ramen, right? You know it. You know it's not a reasonable thing to get both. So what do? No matter what you will get, you will always end up thinking, maybe the other option would have tasted better. And that's what makes choosing so painful in the first place. It's the fear of missing out. So Barry Schwartz refers to this as the paradox of choice. We cherish the idea of having options, but are often better off with less choice. So in design, adding meaningful options is one thing, but cluttering an interface is another. So how much choice is the right amount of choice? Well, it turns out there's no easy answer to this question, but let's just quickly remind ourselves of this famous jam experiment study where people were asked to choose from different sets of jam. One consisted of 24 different types, and one consisted of 6 different types. And what they realized is that the package with less variety sold 10 times more. So adding choices and variation doesn't just add friction, it can literally stop people from making decisions. So where does this leave us in product design? So who is working on a product here? Hands up, don't be shy, I have chocolate. Okay. So we probably all agree that building a product is incredibly hard. And the reason it's so hard is because your product and its features are not the same thing. And I was incredibly fortunate to having worked at Information Architects in Zurich. And they had this tool called IA Writer. And basically, it's just a bare-bones text editor with beautiful typography, but you don't have any options. No typefaces, no formatting, no sharing, nothing. And people loved it. People loved it because it did one thing, and it did it well. It made people focus on their writing rather than the tool. So in this case here, the absence of choice resulted in more focus. So today, we all live and believe in the minimal viable product approach. It's not just an approach with a ridiculously cool name, it also helps us to focus on the core of our products. But I also think there is a little bit of a trap in it, because the minimal viable product basically invites you to think about features. So that's what we do, right? We say, well, one day I'm going to add all those nice little features to my product. So rather than thinking about how you can refine your product, you always think about how you can redefine it. And oftentimes, this can result in a loss of focus because there's always room for improvement. So this is a bit of a personal takeaway, but in my experience, less choice often results in more focus. So placebo choices. Whenever we make decisions, we try to come up with good reasons. Once we have enough of them, we suddenly start to feel really good about ourselves. But when are our decisions really the result of our own conscious minds? For instance, why does Italian music in the wine department make you order more Italian wine? Or why does slow music in restaurants make you stay longer and spend more money? On the other hand, why does loud music in bars make you order more drinks? There are good reasons for that, but we're not really aware of those. So last year, I wrote about crosswalk signal buttons in New York, and as it turns out, 90% of the crosswalk signal buttons in New York do absolutely nothing, but they are still there. Because the sense of being in control and engaging in something cuts down perceived waiting time. So these buttons fulfill an important role. They change the way we feel about waiting. Placebo choices are similar. They change the way we feel about choosing. So I need to choose. So consider the story of the first bread maker machine. The company Williams & Sonoma brought the brand new machine to the market in the 90s. After much consumer research, they decided to release it at an initial price of $275. The results were disappointing. People didn't care much about bread makers these days, but this would later change when a consultancy firm advised them to introduce a premium product to the market, a premium product with features that nobody wants at a much higher price. Sounds legit, right? So what happened is sales suddenly skyrocketed. Okay. Sales suddenly skyrocketed, but the surprising part was that people didn't buy the expensive model. People bought the normal model because compared to the premium model, the normal one was suddenly a good choice. Ah, that's not so expensive. So they gave people a choice that helped them to justify their decision. The Old Economist ad is a similar example here. They ran this ad when they advertised their web-only option for $59 and print-only and print and web package for the exact same price. And of course, no sane person would ever go for the print-only option, but that didn't stop Dan Ariely from conducting an experiment with his students, and he found that if he removed the print-only option, the number of people who would go for print and web would substantially decrease. So clearly, web and print is the best option here. Times are changing. Today it looks a little different, but print only is still there, and print and digital is clearly still the best option. So the value of an option, and that's kind of the takeaway here, the value of an option is defined by its surroundings. As we saw in the square example earlier on, only a few people will probably ever choose the highest tip amount. So in many ways, the highest tip amount is like the fancy bread maker machine. Even though you will not pick it, it will change the way you feel about the other options. So this really seems counterintuitive at first, but deliberately adding an option can sometimes make people more decisive. And I find this fascinating because I never thought that adding an option can change the way people feel towards other options. So moments matter. When we ask people for help, we ask them when they're in a good mood. We have learned somehow in our lives that when we ask people when they're in a good mood, that chances are more likely that we get a positive response. And the same applies to design. The right moment can make a huge difference. So I like checking out like new coffee places from time to time, and I was browsing places on Google Maps in New York, and then I found this place called La Colombe, and as I was about to hit the directions button on Maps, it suddenly threw a pop-up in my face. La Colombe may still be closed if you arrive now. I hope the people in the very back can read this. So La Colombe is closed, and this was incredibly delightful because New York can be very cold in winter days, so it's really saved me from freezing outside by telling me if you leave now, La Colombe will still be closed. And Google Mail is an older and famous example, but I think it's an important one. Mentioning keywords like attachment will bring up this dialog here in case you forgot an attachment. And this is so amazing because it helps users to avoid an awkward moment. So which other areas could take advantage of these so-called contextual choices? Well, I think all of them, but the devil is really in the details here. Consider imagine you want to copy a file on a Windows machine. Yes, a Windows machine. So what happens is you open up the menu, you pick copy. Actually, let's say you want to cut a file. So you pick cut, and then what happens? You navigate to another folder, deep down the rabbit hole, and then you suddenly realize, oh, damn it, I didn't actually want to cut it. I just wanted to duplicate it. I wanted to create a copy of it. So on the Mac, you don't have a cut option, and there's a good reason for that. On Mac, you always copy the file and only decide at the very end of your interaction whether you want to paste the file, or whether you want to duplicate a file, or whether you want to move a file. So this helps you that if you're deep down a folder structure, you don't need to end up going back because you can still decide what you want to do. So I like to think of choices as path in a timeline of a user interface, and the right choice at the right time can simplify the user experience. So I was recently hired to redesign the website of coffeecentral.ch, which is the biggest coffee retailer in Switzerland. And actually, the new logo on top is already there. I think it's pretty cute. And so when I started, I was kind of overwhelmed by the amount of choices. As you can see, this design comes from an era where tag clouds were as hot as hamburger buttons are today. So when they started to send me like mind maps of how their different products are related to each other, I started to get a little worried about this project because it suddenly felt like this is so complicated. Why is this so complicated? I just want a cappuccino in the morning. So after long hours of discussions with my friends, I realized that the critical questions that we need to ask is which form of coffee do you need? And when we ask that question up front, all the other context, all the other questions along the way that the user had to answer suddenly were contextual. So the right moment can change the way people use and think about an interface, and that's something I've always underestimated. So I will skip this chapter here because I'm running out of time. Let's talk about default behaviors. This is actually the last point of my presentation. So there's something magical about defaults, because defaults truly reflect the don't make me think mentality. One reason we love them so much is because we hope that someone already made the right decision for us. When we think about defaults, we mostly think about checkboxes. And indeed, those defaults play a huge role in form design. But the concept of defaults goes far beyond checkboxes. Take writing emails as an example. When Inbox introduced smart replies, it changed my life. Inbox evaluates the content of your message and suggests default answers. So it literally made me a better emailer. I reply faster and cooler than ever before. And those types of defaults make people happy. It makes people happy because they can focus on things that they really care about in their life. So let's stay in the realm of email here for a second. So consider how users copy text from the web and paste it into their emails. So by default, copied text includes formatting. The result? Even the most professionally written email suddenly looks like a major disaster because all those different styles get mixed up together. So what do people do? That's really interesting. I asked a couple of people and I observed them. So here's what they did. So some of them copied the text to the browser bar and then copied the text from the browser bar. I can see someone laughing. You're doing the same thing. They copy it from the browser bar, copy it back to their email, and then they're happy, right? And then there are the other people. There are the other people who open up a text editor, paste it in the text editor, format it to plain text, copy it back, and paste it into their emails. So, you know, at some point in your life, someone probably came along and told you, hey, there's a shortcut for that, didn't you know? So you get all excited, I'm learning something new today, right? But then it only gets frustrating as you realize this shortcut is not the same shortcut across different apps. So just when you thought you learned something new, you're suddenly really frustrated. So in the context of copying text, most users would be better off when copying formatting was the option rather than the default. So we should always think about this. What's the default behavior here? Should something be the option or should it be the default? Sometimes it's not obvious, but the impact is undoubtedly huge. Let's look at Medium here for a second. They put a lot of thought in its platform, but the reason it reads and writes so well isn't because they chose a nice typeface. I believe one of the many reasons is because they help users with typography. Let's, for instance, if you write 3 dots at the end of a paragraph, it automatically converts them to the typographical correct ellipsis sign. Another thing is double spaces. In the area of typewriters, we used to write double spaces so sentences would better be separated from each other. And this somehow created the misconception that people thought that writing 2 spaces at the end of a sentence is a good thing to do. So what did Medium do here? So when you write on Medium, you tap space. You can see I'm desperately hitting the space bar, but nothing happens because there's already a space there. So Medium tries to help me by not making me do mistakes, by not allowing me to do mistakes. Dashes is another example. I could go on. There are many of those details. Dashes is also something that's often used the wrong way. But as you can see, also Medium here automatically replaces it with the typographical correct dash. So I think that interaction design and writing actually have a lot in common. An interaction is like a sentence, and we put a period at the end of a sentence. So let's just consider this example real quick. Let's imagine you want to search something on this website. So what do? You tap on the search icon in the upper left corner. But now what happens? Now I need to click again. I need to click again in the search box, even though I already made my decision. I really want to search. You don't believe me? You make me click again? Really? So this interaction is not finished. So let's compare this to Quartz. Okay. So let's imagine you want to search something here. So you tap on the search bar, and then you get this beautiful, huge, sophisticated cursor that blinks and waits for your input. It's wonderful. There are other things that are broken here. You can't leave search mode. It's really tricky. So 2 takeaways here. First of all, it's really hard to build search. Second of all, make sure that you finish your interactions. Those details, if you want to lead users to something, if you have a form that suddenly progressively reveals as the user taps on a button, make sure you already focus the input field so that users know what they have to do next. So defaults make or break the experience. So imagine a world where copying and pasting would just work. Imagine a world where defaults would always be sensible. We probably all agree that this would be a better world. So that's the power of default behaviors. So today, we covered a few points, and we saw how it can shape people's decisions and the way they perceive design. We started to talk about the number of options, how the number of options can potentially affect people's perception of a product or a design. We went on and talked about placebo choices, how adding a seemingly irrelevant option can be very relevant in terms of the decision's outcome. Then we talked about why moments matter in design. We talked about the importance of sequence, which I skipped. And then, last but not least, and perhaps most importantly, we talked about default behaviors. So I found all of this remarkable because I recently got too caught up in the superficial nature of design again, whereas this goes right back to the basics. Choosing is painful, and I believe that terrific design isn't just about making users decide better, it's about making them feel better about the decisions they make. And that's what I think creates a truly delightful experience. So hopefully some of the points I mentioned here today were useful to you, and hopefully you think about them when the next decisions are to be made. Thank you so much.